You've seen fire your entire life. Candles, campfires, a stove turning blue beneath a pan. You strike a match, and suddenly, flames appear. It feels ordinary. But stop for a moment and ask a much deeper question. Why does fire exist at all? Not how to light it, not how to put it out, but why this strange, violent, beautiful thing suddenly appears in the universe. Most people never ask this. Fire burns, fire lights, fire destroys. End of story. And yet, when you truly understand what fire is, you discover something so deeply connected to atoms, energy, life, and even the sun itself, that you will never look at a flame the same way again. Let's begin with something so ordinary that we usually don't even notice it. Picture a piece of wood, a dry log, old, forgotten. It has been sitting there for years, maybe decades, exposed to the open air. Nothing about it seems special. It doesn't move. It doesn't glow. It doesn't change in any visible way. It looks dead, completely inactive. Now look at what surrounds it. Air. Not empty space, but a storm of invisible activity. Trillions upon trillions of oxygen molecules are flying around at incredible speeds, crashing into everything they touch, including that piece of wood, every second, day and night, without rest, without interruption. So here is the situation. The wood is there. The oxygen is there. They have been together for a very long time, and yet, absolutely nothing happens. No flame appears, no warmth spreads, not even the smallest spark. At first glance, this feels normal, but if you really think about it, it should feel deeply unsettling. Why this is so strange? Because wood is not chemically neutral. Wood is packed with carbon, one of the most reactive elements in nature. And oxygen? Oxygen has an extraordinary attraction to carbon. When carbon and oxygen finally manage to bond, they form an extremely stable molecule. And when that happens, a large amount of energy is released. This is not a rare or exotic reaction. It is one of the most energetically favorable processes in chemistry. In simple terms, from the universe's point of view, carbon and oxygen want to be together. That bonded state is more stable, lower energy, more comfortable for the atoms involved. So if the ingredients are already present, carbon in the wood, oxygen in the air, then something feels very wrong. The question. We never ask. We usually ask the wrong question. We ask, why does fire appear? But that's not the real mystery. The real question is far more disturbing. Why doesn't fire appear all the time? Why doesn't this log suddenly burst into flames on its own? Why don't our lungs ignite every time we breathe oxygen? Why isn't the surface of the earth locked in a permanent inferno? After all, the conditions seem perfect. The ingredients are already mixed. The reaction is strongly favored, and yet the world remains calm, stable, silent, unburned. The answer lies in a crucial idea that most people never see. Wanting to react is not enough. Even if a reaction would release energy, even if it would lead to a more stable state, there is still an obstacle in the way. Between the current state of the wood and the fiery state it could become, there exists an invisible energy barrier. At normal temperatures, atoms are always moving. They vibrate, they collide, they bounce off one another endlessly. Oxygen molecules strike the surface of the wood billions of times, but they don't stay together. They touch for a fraction of a second, then separate, again and again and again. Each collision fails, not because the reaction is impossible, but because the atoms don't have enough energy to cross that barrier. This is why the log can lie in open air for centuries without burning. This is why you can inhale oxygen without bursting into flames. This is why the universe is far more stable than it has any right to be. The reactions are not forbidden, they are simply blocked, locked behind an invisible threshold that atoms cannot cross on their own. Fire doesn't exist because matter is eager to react. Fire exists only when something provides the extra push, the precise amount of energy needed to break through that barrier. Until then, the wood and the oxygen remain trapped together in a tense, quiet standoff, side by side, perfectly capable of releasing enormous energy, and yet doing nothing at all. That silence, that delay, is the real mystery behind fire. The answer is subtle, but it is absolutely fundamental. Simply wanting to react is not enough. Between a quiet piece of wood and a raging fire, there is something you cannot see, cannot touch, and rarely think about: an invisible barrier made of energy. You can imagine it as a hill. On one side of the hill is the wood as it exists now, stable, calm, unchanged. On the other side is fire, carbon bonded to oxygen, energy released, motion everywhere. The second state is more stable. The universe would actually prefer to be there. But preference is meaningless unless the atoms can get over the hill. At room temperature, atoms are never still. They vibrate constantly. They rush around at astonishing speeds. They collide with one another endlessly. Oxygen molecules slam into the surface of the wood billions of times every second. So why doesn't anything happen? Because despite all this motion, the atoms are still not energetic enough. They get close, very close, but not close enough, and not for long enough. They touch, then immediately bounce apart. Again, and again, and again. Each collision is like a failed attempt to climb the hill. They start up the slope, but they run out of energy before reaching the top. So they slide back down to where they started. This situation has a name. It's called metastability. It means the system is not in the lowest energy state possible, but it is trapped in a state that can persist indefinitely. Nothing forces it to change. Unless something interferes, this fragile balance can last forever. That is why a piece of wood can sit in open air for centuries without burning. That is why your body does not ignite simply because oxygen fills your lungs. That is why cities, forests, and entire planets are not permanently on fire. The calm world you experience every day exists because matter is locked behind energy barriers it cannot cross on its own. Fire does not require new ingredients. Everything it needs is already there. What's missing is a trigger, a spark, a flame, a sudden surge of heat, something, anything that injects enough energy into a small number of atoms, just a few. Once those atoms reach the top of the hill, the situation changes completely. They don't fall back. They cross over. The instant even a handful of atoms succeed in crossing the barrier, they form new bonds. And when those bonds form, energy is released. That released energy doesn't stay localized. It spreads. It accelerates nearby atoms, giving them enough energy to climb the hill as well. One successful reaction becomes two. Two become four. Four become many. What was once impossible suddenly becomes inevitable. This is the moment fire is born. Not because the rules changed, but because the barrier was finally crossed. And once that happens, the calm, metastable world gives way to chaos. Now, change just one thing. Add a little heat to the wood, not enough to create flames, not enough to hear crackling or see smoke. From the outside, everything still looks calm and unchanged. But at the microscopic level, a quiet revolution begins. Inside the wood, atoms start to vibrate faster. Their motion becomes slightly more intense, slightly more chaotic. Nothing visible yet, but the balance that held everything in place is no longer perfectly stable. Among the countless billions of atoms, a tiny minority finally gets lucky. By pure chance, a few of them gain just enough energy to climb all the way up the invisible hill that once stopped every attempt. When these energized carbon atoms collide with oxygen this time, something different happens. They don't bounce apart. They stay together. They form a bond. And the moment that bond forms, energy is released. Far more energy than was required to trigger the reaction in the first place. This energy doesn't vanish into nothingness. It instantly turns into motion. Violent, chaotic motion. Nearby atoms are shaken by it. They vibrate faster. They collide more violently. Atoms that a moment ago were unable to cross the barrier are suddenly pushed over the edge. They react as well. And when they do, they release even more energy. This is where everything accelerates. One successful reaction creates the conditions for two more. Two reactions create the conditions for four. Four create eight. Eight become hundreds. Hundreds become millions. The process does not grow step by step. It doesn't unfold gently or gradually. It explodes. In a tiny fraction of a second, an enormous number of atoms cross the barrier almost simultaneously. The quiet, controlled motion that existed before collapses into chaos. What began as a small, nearly invisible increase in atomic vibration becomes a runaway chain reaction. The energy released feeds the next reaction, and the next reaction feeds the one after that. This is the precise moment when fire comes into existence. Not slowly, not smoothly, but suddenly. When a critical threshold is crossed, and the system can no longer remain calm. Fire does not creep into existence step by step. It does not politely announce itself or slowly build momentum. One moment, nothing seems to be happening. The next, everything changes. Like an avalanche that begins with a single shift of snow, or a dam that holds for years and then collapses in an instant, fire erupts suddenly, violently, turning calm into chaos. This suddenness is not an accident. It is the direct consequence of crossing a critical threshold. Below that threshold, reactions struggle, fail, and die out. Above it, they no longer need help. Once the barrier is crossed, the process begins to sustain itself. The energy released by the first successful reactions does not remain isolated. It spreads outward, agitating nearby atoms, forcing them into faster motion. That added motion gives those atoms exactly what they were missing before, enough energy to react as well. Each new reaction releases more energy. That energy creates even more motion. That motion triggers even more reactions. The system feeds on itself. Heat is no longer just a byproduct. It becomes the driving force. The warmth generated by the fire is what allows the fire to continue existing. It supplies the energy needed for fresh atoms to overcome the barrier that once held them back. This is why fire is so difficult to stop once it starts. As long as there is fuel, oxygen, and sufficient heat, the loop remains intact. Remove one element, and the cycle breaks. But while all three are present, the process reinforces itself relentlessly. Fire is not alive, and it does not want anything. Yet once initiated, it behaves with frightening determination. It follows the cold, precise logic of energy and motion, accelerating until something interrupts the loop. That is what makes fire both mesmerizing and dangerous. Once born, it carries within itself everything it needs to keep going. There is a deeply important idea here, one that completely changes how you should think about fire and heat. Heat is not a thing you can hold or pour. It is not a substance. There is no invisible hot fluid flowing from a flame into your hand. Heat is motion. More precisely, heat is a measure of how fast atoms and molecules are moving. Every piece of matter, even one that looks perfectly still, is alive with microscopic motion. Atoms are constantly vibrating, shifting, and colliding with their neighbors. When that motion is gentle and slow, we describe the object as cold. When it becomes faster and more violent, we describe it as hot. Fire is simply an extreme version of this idea. When a fire burns, chemical reactions break old bonds and form new ones. In doing so, they release energy. That energy does not float around as something abstract. It is immediately converted into motion. Atoms and molecules begin to fly, twist, and collide at extraordinary speeds. When you hold your hand near a flame, you are not feeling fire itself. What you feel is an assault of rapidly moving particles crashing into the atoms of your skin. Each collision transfers a bit of motion. Your skin atoms begin to vibrate faster and faster in response. Your nervous system interprets that sudden increase in motion as warmth. If the motion becomes too intense, the sensation turns into pain. Pain is not a special substance either. It is simply motion that exceeds what your body can tolerate. This is why fire should not be thought of as an object. It has no solid shape, no fixed boundary, no material body. Fire is a region of space where atoms are in a state of extreme agitation, moving far faster than the surrounding matter. And this motion is not just a consequence of fire, it is the reason fire continues to exist. The faster atoms move, the more violently they collide. The more violent the collisions, the more likely it becomes that new chemical reactions will occur. Those reactions release even more energy, which increases the motion even further. Heat, in this sense, is not a side effect. It is the engine. Fire sustains itself by the motion it creates. Each reaction fuels the next by making the atomic world more chaotic, more energetic, more reactive. Fire quite literally feeds on its own movement. So where does wood actually come from? The obvious answer feels undeniable: from the soil. After all, trees are rooted in the ground. We plant a seed in the earth, water it, and watch a trunk rise upward. It seems natural to assume that the solid mass of a tree is built from the dirt beneath it, but this intuition is almost completely wrong. In reality, nearly all the mass of a tree comes from the air. This sounds absurd at first. Air feels empty, weightless, insignificant. And yet, the towering trunk, the heavy branches, the dense wood you can lift and burn, all of it is largely made from something that was once invisible gas. Trees constantly pull carbon dioxide, CO2, out of the atmosphere. Each molecule of CO2 contains a single atom of carbon tightly bound to 2 atoms of oxygen. That carbon is the true building block of wood. It is woven into long chains and complex structures that form the trunk, the branches, and every fiber of the tree. But there is a problem hidden inside this process. Carbon and oxygen are not easy to separate. Their bond is strong and stable. Pulling them apart does not happen spontaneously. It requires a tremendous input of energy. That energy comes from one source alone: the sun. Through photosynthesis, plants capture sunlight and use it to do something remarkable. Photon by photon, they inject energy into chemical systems, forcing carbon and oxygen apart despite their strong attraction. This is not a single dramatic event, but a slow, relentless process. Day after day, year after year, light energy is absorbed, transformed, and used to tear carbon free. The plant keeps the carbon. It assembles it patiently into sugars, fibers, and solid structures. Over time, those structures become wood. The oxygen, however, is not needed. In fact, for early life on Earth, oxygen was toxic, so plants release it back into the atmosphere. The oxygen you breathe is not a gift designed for animals. It is biological waste. The soil, surprisingly, plays only a supporting role. It provides water and trace minerals, elements needed in tiny amounts. When wood burns, these minerals do not disappear. They remain behind as ash. Everything else, the bulk, the mass, the substance of the tree, came from the air and from sunlight. A tree is not made of earth. A tree is air, transformed and solidified by the energy of the sun. Trees and fire are engaged in the same process, but they run it in opposite directions. A tree takes carbon and oxygen that are tightly bound together in carbon dioxide and, using energy from sunlight, forces them apart. This is not a passive act. It requires work. Light from the sun is absorbed, converted, and used to pry atoms away from a stable configuration they would otherwise prefer to remain in. Fire does the reverse. It takes carbon and oxygen that have been kept apart and drives them back together. When they reunite, the energy that was once required to separate them is released again. What the tree patiently built, fire dismantles in an instant. This is why trees are energy storers, and fire is an energy releaser. Over years or even decades, a tree quietly collects sunlight and locks it away in chemical bonds. Each bond is like a stretched spring, holding potential energy in place. Wood is not just matter. It is matter under tension, charged with energy that has nowhere to go until those bonds are broken. Every piece of wood is, in this sense, frozen sunlight. A natural battery slowly charged by the sun, photon by photon, season after season. When you burn wood, you are not creating energy out of nothing. Nothing new is being added to the universe. You are simply opening the battery and letting its contents spill out all at once. The heat you feel and the light you see are the same energy that once arrived on Earth as sunlight, captured long ago and stored in solid form. Fire is not just a chemical reaction. It is ancient sunshine, finally escaping. And here is the final twist, one that brings the entire story back to you. You burn as well. Inside your body, right now, the same fundamental chemistry that drives a flame is taking place. Carbon atoms from the food you eat are constantly meeting oxygen atoms that you breathe in. When they combine, energy is released. This is not a metaphor. It is literally the same type of reaction that happens in a fire. The difference is not the chemistry, the difference is control. A flame releases its energy all at once, violently, without restraint. Your body does the opposite. It breaks the process into countless tiny steps, carefully regulated by enzymes and cellular machinery. Each reaction is slowed, guided, and contained so that the energy can be captured instead of exploding outward. Because of this control, there are no flames inside you, no destruction, no sudden release. The energy is released gradually and immediately put to work. That energy powers the contraction of your muscles. It drives electrical signals through your nerves. It maintains your body temperature. It keeps your heart beating and your lungs moving. You are not fueled by something different from fire. You are fire, just slowed down, tamed, and shaped into something stable. A living organism is a controlled combustion, a flame stretched across time. Every breath you take feeds it. Every meal replenishes it, and every moment of motion, thought, and life is powered by the same process that makes flames rise and dance in the air. The sun pours energy into the world without pause. An immense, continuous flood of light crosses space and reaches Earth. Plants intercept that energy and store it. Slowly, patiently, they capture sunlight and lock it away in chemical bonds, building their bodies from air and light. Animals and humans take that stored energy and release it gradually. We unwind it step by step, using it to move, to think, to live. The release is controlled, stretched across time. Fire takes a different path. It releases the same energy instantly, in a sudden burst of heat and light, undoing in moments what plants spent years creating. When this happens, carbon returns to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, exactly where it began. From there, plants capture it once again, and the process starts over. Nothing is wasted, nothing is lost. The same atoms cycle endlessly between air, wood, flame, and living bodies. This loop has been running for hundreds of millions of years, driven by the same source and governed by the same rules. Fire is not an accident. It is not a flaw in nature. It is a natural consequence of how energy moves through the universe. And yet, one question remains, larger and more profound than all the rest. Why is the sun itself so unimaginably hot? Why does it blaze with energy strong enough to power the cycles of life, to fill trees with stored sunlight, to make fire dance in our hands, and to ignite the slow combustion within our own cells? That is another story entirely.